The failed attempt on his life in the desolate attic room did not result in a spiritual rebirth or a sudden embrace of life's fragile beauty. Instead, it forged a chilling, cynical clarity in Augustus Darren Finch. He emerged from the shadow of the rope not grateful, but deeply, savagely disillusioned. The great realization that solidified in the void left by his shattered ideals was brutal in its simplicity. The world, the merciless architect of his humiliation and despair, did not operate on virtue, on the profound beauty of poetry, or on the intricate wisdom of classical philosophy. It operated on two fundamental, unassailable pillars: money and appearance. His inherent intelligence and kindness had bought him nothing but ridicule and a slap across the face. His poetic sensibilities had merely served as a private comfort in a public execution. The sight of Clara and Trevor's flawless, smiling faces in the newspaper, their lives consecrated by wealth and conventional beauty, served as a daily, acid-etched testament to this cruel truth. He looked at the few remaining notebooks filled with exquisite sonnets and saw only useless, damning evidence of his own naive stupidity. They were, in the cold light of his new realism, nothing more than the eloquent scribbles of a beggar. This new, hardened resolve was not selfish. It was fundamentally centered on his one remaining emotional anchor, Sarah. Seeing her quiet distress after the public humiliation, witnessing her fiercely loyal, protective sadness, galvanized him. He knew that as long as he remained poor, an outcast intellectual clinging to a romantic ideal, she would forever be vulnerable within the oppressive confines of their family and the judgmental gaze of their town. Her future, her chance at a life unburdened by the Finch's financial stress and the town's small-mindedness depended entirely on him securing the only currency the world respected. It was a desperate, almost religious commitment to securing her freedom through the very mechanism that had destroyed him. He made the surgical, cynical decision to abandon his university studies, leaving his books to gather dust, and to utterly excise the poetry from his life. It was a cold, pragmatic sacrifice of his soul for her stability. He needed money, and he needed it now, in a substantial quantity, to create a solid foundation for Sarah to eventually escape. His initial, desperate foray into the world of pragmatic earning led him down a strained and morally ambiguous path. He entered into a brief, transactional arrangement with a person named Riley. Riley was an acquaintance from the fringes of the university scene, known for their sharp, artistic sensibilities and perpetually struggling financial situation, coupled with an intense internal conflict regarding their own gender identity that placed them firmly outside the boundaries of the town's rigid norms. The arrangement was murky, built on shared desperation rather than affection. Riley needed money for rent and a quiet escape. Darren needed enough immediate capital to fund his own eventual flight and subsequent operations. The exact nature of the exchange was purely mercenary and temporary, a strained cohabitation intended to defraud a third, more financially solvent party, perhaps a brief stint of collaborative, ethically dubious work. The details were fleeting, ugly, and designed to generate quick cash. The arrangement soon frayed, disintegrating under the weight of mistrust and mutual stress. Riley, unstable and volatile, saw the cynical transaction as merely another confirmation of the world's transactional coldness, while Darren viewed Riley's complex emotional landscape as a disruptive variable to his strictly calculated goals. Yet, despite its failure and inherent sordidness, this alliance was a crucial exposure. It pulled Darren out of the narrow focus of his own aesthetic despair and exposed him to another, wider layer of society's marginalized, those who were cast out not just for their appearance or lack of money, but for their fundamental internal identity. Riley's struggle, their daily war between who they were and how the world demanded they present, offered Darren a momentary, external perspective on ostracism. It was a different flavor of stigma than his own, less about the poetry and more about the very structure of self, but the resulting social isolation and need for secrecy felt tragically familiar. The encounter solidified his understanding that the world was partitioned into the privileged majority who set the rules, and the vast, fractured minority who were perpetually scrambling for survival outside the walls. His resolve hardened further. He would no longer be one of the scrambling masses. After this brief, failed period of mercenary earning, Darren pivoted, trying to leverage his intellectual gifts one last time, hoping to find a wealthy sponsor for his mind, if not for his soul. He managed to secure a meeting through a former professor with Veronica, a prominent and undeniably wealthy patron of the arts in a slightly larger neighboring city. Veronica, middle-aged and impeccably dressed, was genuinely impressed by Darren's erudition and his sharp, articulate dissection of contemporary literature, mistaking his cold analysis for passionate commitment. She saw in him raw, untamed potential. Their connection, fleeting and heady, was almost instantly terminated by the intervention of Veronica's mother, an imperious, fiercely pragmatic matriarch who smelled poverty and desperation on him like cheap cologne. The mother cornered Darren during a break in the conversation, her eyes sharp and assessing, reducing him to his most basic, unpalatable components. Her words were delivered with a glacial politeness that was far more wounding than Mr. Davis's violent slap. "Young man," she stated, her voice soft but absolute, "my daughter does not need another project. She needs stability. You are clearly intelligent, perhaps brilliantly so, but intelligence is common among the unfortunate. Poetry, Mr. Finch, is the luxury of the secure, or the hobby of the doomed. If you want to exist in our world, if you want anything beyond that cramped, dusty life you emerged from, you do not need to become a poet. You need to become rich. You must conquer the system, not critique it. Come back when you have property, not when you have stanzas." This dismissal, delivered with such cold, undeniable authority, was the final, absolute confirmation Darren needed. It was a perfectly articulated statement of the social gospel that had repeatedly crushed him. It was not enough to be smart. You had to have the tangible armor of capital. The encounter with Veronica and the matriarch's brutal prescription provided the last necessary push. He returned home and systematically began to cut every remaining emotional tie that bound him to the weakness and humiliation of his past. He stopped speaking to his family, enduring their confused resentment with a cold indifference he had mastered in the attic. He left Sarah a substantial portion of the small, ill-gotten funds he had scraped together, accompanied by a letter of vague, protective promises for the future, a gesture meant to secure her escape route long before he secured his own. He looked at the familiar, depressing streets of his hometown, the gray sky, the rusting factory gates, the small-minded people, and saw not the source of his pain, but the crucible that had refined him into an unstoppable weapon. Augustus Finch was dead. The aspirational, sensitive poet had been successfully murdered by his environment. He liquidated the few possessions he had, bought a one-way train ticket, and moved, not to a quiet haven or a creative hub, but to the harshest, most indifferent proving ground he could imagine, Chicago. He chose the vast, impersonal metropolis because it promised anonymity, and because it was the undisputed capital of the capitalist structure he was now determined to conquer. He saw the city's skyscrapers not as architectural marvels, but as monumental challenge trophies built by the very forces that had mocked him. He walked away from his life with a singular, chilling focus. He would become what the world demanded. He would acquire the money and the power necessary to command respect, to protect Sarah, and above all, to ensure that no one, not a jealous father, not a snobbish socialite, and certainly not a town full of small-minded bigots, would ever again have the power to slap him down. The road to survival was not paved with good intentions or beautiful verse, but with cold, calculated, relentless ambition. His journey was not toward self-discovery, but toward self-creation, shaping himself into a man of iron to wield the only true power, the power of capital.